Settle into a comfortable position. Let the concerns of your day drift away like sand carried on a distant wind. Tonight, we journey back across nearly 2 millennia to a time when the world's great civilizations were connected by thin threads of commerce stretching across some of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth. You are about to experience a single day in the life of a caravan guard on the Silk Road during the 2nd century of the Common Era. This is not a tale of adventure or heroism, but rather an exploration of the quiet, patient rhythms that define this profession. The slow padding of camel feet on sand, the gentle chime of bells in the still desert air, the weight of responsibility carried through endless expanses of emptiness. As you listen, imagine yourself stepping into this role. Feel the textures of another time settle around you. Let the steady, unhurried pace of caravan life guide you toward rest. The journey ahead is long, measured not in excitement, but in the persistent, methodical continuation of one footfall after another across the vastness. Let us begin. The stars are still visible when you open your eyes, countless pinpoints of light scattered across the black vault of the desert sky. There is no gradual awakening here, no luxury of lingering between sleep and consciousness. Your internal rhythm, calibrated by months of this work, pulls you from slumber while the world remains dark and blessedly cool. You lie for a moment beneath your woolen blanket, feeling its weight and warmth. The air against your face is crisp, almost cold. The desert night has drawn all heat from the sand and stone. Around you, the camp is beginning to stir with quiet sounds, the soft movements of other guards rising, the low murmur of merchants checking their goods, the occasional grunt or exhalation of a camel shifting in its rest. Your body aches in familiar ways. Your shoulders carry a dull throb from yesterday's long hours of walking. Your feet, though hardened by this life, protest the thought of another day's journey. You are neither young nor old, perhaps 30 years, perhaps 35. Age is measured differently out here, calculated in journeys completed rather than seasons passed. Rising slowly, you fold your blanket with practiced movements. Everything in a caravan guard's life must be methodical, deliberate. There is no room for haste or carelessness when your survival, and the survival of those you protect, depends on order and routine. The blanket is rolled tightly and secured with a leather strap. It will be tied to your camel's pack, taking its place among the carefully balanced load. The camp around you is a temporary arrangement of goods and animals, a small island of human presence in the vast emptiness. 47 camels stand or kneel in their designated positions, arranged in the groups of 5 to 12 that will form the day's caravan lines. The merchants, 17 of them on this particular journey, move among their goods, checking bindings and assessing their cargo by the light of small oil lamps that cast flickering shadows. You perform your morning ablutions with water from your personal skin, precious liquid measured in careful sips and splashes. The water is lukewarm, tasting faintly of the animal hide that contains it. You wet your hands, your face, the back of your neck. You rinse your mouth. Every drop is accounted for, every drop a small expenditure from a finite resource that must last until the next caravanserai. The meal before departure is simple, as all meals on the road must be. Dried bread, hard as leather until softened in your mouth. A handful of dates, their sweetness a small pleasure in the pre-dawn darkness. A few strips of dried meat, salted and tough, requiring patient chewing. You eat slowly, without particular enjoyment or displeasure. This is fuel, nothing more. The act of eating is simply another task in the long sequence of tasks that structure your days. Around you, the other guards perform similar rituals. There are 8 of you in total, hired collectively by the merchants to provide protection for this leg of the journey. You know these men, though not intimately. There is Boron, the oldest among you, whose weathered face seems carved from the same stone as the desert mountains. There is young Rustam, on only his 3rd caravan, still learning to walk with the patient, distance-consuming stride that this work requires. There is Khosrow, who rarely speaks, and Timur, who rarely stops speaking. You are not friends, precisely. Friendship requires a kind of leisure that caravan guards do not possess. But you are bound together by shared purpose and shared risk. You understand each other's competencies. You know who will remain steady if bandits appear, who might falter, who can be trusted in the deep night watches when exhaustion makes the mind play tricks. Your equipment is laid out on a square of cloth, each item in its designated place. A composite bow, its layers of wood and sinew and horn, laminated together to create a weapon of remarkable power. 24 arrows, their feathers carefully preserved, their points sharp and true. A short sword, practical rather than decorative, its blade showing the nicks and wear of use. A small knife for daily tasks. A length of rope. A water skin. A pouch containing a needle, thread, a fire striker, a few other small essentials. You check each item with the same deliberate attention you give to all tasks. The bowstring is examined for fraying. The arrows are counted and inspected. The sword is drawn partway from its sheath, ensuring it moves freely. These are not dramatic gestures, but quiet confirmations that your tools remain ready, remain reliable. The sky begins to pale at the eastern horizon, a gradual lightening that transforms black to deepest blue. The stars fade one by one, the brightest holding on longest before surrendering to the approaching day. There is a particular quality to this liminal time, a sense of the world holding its breath before the heat and glare of daylight arrive. The head merchant, a man named Hormizd, moves through the camp with measured authority. He is responsible for the caravan's organization, for negotiating the collective decisions that guide the journey. He speaks briefly with the lead camel driver, confirming the day's route. He exchanges words with Borin, the senior guard, reviewing the positioning of protection for the day's travel. You listen without appearing to listen, a skill developed over many journeys. The route ahead will take you across relatively open terrain, following the well-worn track that countless caravans have impressed into the desert floor. There are no particular dangers anticipated today. No narrow passes where bandits might wait. No treacherous terrain requiring special care. It will be, if fortune holds, an unremarkable day. These are the days you prefer. The camels are loaded with careful attention to weight distribution. Each animal can carry remarkable loads, but only if those loads are balanced properly. The merchants and their servants work together, lifting heavy bundles of silk wrapped in protective cloth, ceramic vessels cushioned with straw, leather sacks containing spices and dried goods, blocks of pressed tea, bolts of cotton fabric. The camels accept this process with patient indifference. They are Bactrian camels, two-humped creatures, superbly adapted to the extremes of temperature and the scarcity of water that define these landscapes. Their thick fur, still heavy from winter though spring has arrived, will shed in great matted clumps as the season progresses. Their broad feet distribute weight across sand and stone with equal efficiency. Their capacity to store fat in their humps, converting it to water and energy when needed, makes them irreplaceable for this work. You watch the loading, noting the placement of the most valuable goods. Your job requires understanding where the silk is packed, where the most portable and precious items rest. These are the targets bandits seek, and you must know instinctively which camels to defend most urgently if danger appears. The camels are arranged into their traveling groups. Each group consists of 8 to 10 animals, roped together head to tail in a single line. The lead camel in each group wears a harness of leather and wool, decorated with small amulets and charms meant to ensure safe passage. The last camel in each line carries a bell, a simple bronze piece that produces a clear, distinct chime with each step. This bell serves a crucial function. The sound provides confirmation that the line remains intact, that no animal has broken free or been cut loose by thieves attempting to separate a camel from the caravan. If the bell falls silent unexpectedly, If its rhythm breaks, every guard's attention immediately focuses on that string of camels. The sun breaks above the horizon, a fierce point of light that rapidly expands into a disk of white gold radiance. The temperature, which had fallen to a chill during the night, begins its steady climb. Within 2 hours, the cold will be forgotten, replaced by the relentless warmth that will only intensify as morning progresses toward midday. The caravan begins to move. There is no dramatic signal, no shouted command. The lead camel driver simply starts walking, and his animals follow, and the line behind them follows, and gradually the entire caravan unfolds into motion. The guards take their positions 2 ahead, scouting the route and watching for potential threats. 2 on each flank, positioned to see bandits attempting to approach from the sides. 2 at the rear, ensuring nothing is lost or left behind. You are assigned to the right flank today, a position you occupy by rotation. Yesterday, you walked at the rear. Tomorrow, you will scout ahead. This rotation ensures no guard bears the most demanding positions continuously, and ensures every guard remains familiar with each role's responsibilities. The sound of the caravan is a layered composition. The soft padding of camel feet against sand provides the fundamental rhythm, a gentle percussion that continues without pause. Overlaying this are the bells, each with its slightly different tone, creating a dispersed melody that seems to float above the caravan. The occasional groan or grumble from a camel adds texture. The creak of rope and leather, the almost inaudible whisper of sand displaced by dozens of feet. Human voices are sparse. The merchants walk alongside their goods, silent in the morning stillness. The camel drivers make occasional soft sounds, clicking their tongues or murmuring brief words to encourage their animals. The guards do not speak at all. Your attention must be directed outward, scanning the landscape for anything unusual, anything that breaks the expected patterns. The landscape through which you pass is neither entirely barren nor obviously fertile. Hardy shrubs dot the sandy soil, their roots reaching deep to find moisture. Occasional rock outcroppings rise like islands from the sand. In the far distance, mountains create a jagged line against the brightening sky, their peaks still holding snow, though the season is advancing. You walk with a particular stride learned over months of this work. The steps are not hurried, but they are purposeful, covering ground without wasting energy. Your feet find the firmest paths almost unconsciously, avoiding loose sand when possible, seeking the harder-packed earth that requires less effort. Your breathing maintains a steady rhythm, neither labored nor too easy. This is the pace that can be sustained for hours. That must be sustained for hours. The heat builds. By mid-morning, the sun has become a weight pressing down from above. The air shimmers in the distance, creating mirages that might be water or trees or settlements, but are only tricks of light and heat. You have long since learned to ignore these phantom visions, to trust only what remains solid and consistent as you approach. Your water skin hangs at your side, and you drink from it sparingly. Small sips, enough to wet your mouth and throat, but not enough to provide the deep satisfaction of true thirst quenched. Water must be rationed. The next caravanserai is still many hours distant, and though wells sometimes exist between these waypoints, they cannot always be relied upon. When the sun reaches its zenith, the caravan stops. This is not a full halt, not a camp, but a brief respite from the most intense heat. The camels are allowed to kneel, though their loads remain secured. The merchants settle in whatever shade can be found, the shadow cast by a kneeling camel, the lee side of a rocky outcrop, the slight shelter provided by goods stacked together. You remain standing, though you shift your weight frequently, giving each leg a measure of relief. The guards do not rest during these stops, not fully. This is when a caravan is most vulnerable, when attention might waver, when the temptation to close eyes and drift into brief sleep becomes almost overwhelming. You eat a small amount more dried bread, a few more dates. You take another measured drink from your water skin. Around you, the desert settles into the profound stillness that characterizes the hottest part of the day. Even the insects seem to pause, waiting for the sun's fury to diminish. The stop lasts perhaps an hour, measured not by instruments, but by the sun's position and the collective sense of the merchants and drivers that sufficient rest has been taken. Then, almost imperceptibly, the caravan begins to stir again. The camels rise, first the front legs folding up, then the back legs lifting their loads in a practiced motion. The merchants stand and brush sand from their clothing. The drivers check ropes and bindings. The afternoon is, in many ways, more demanding than the morning. The heat has accumulated in the sand, in the stones, in the very air. Each breath feels thick and warm in your lungs. Sweat that formed on your skin in the morning has dried, leaving salt deposits that make your clothing stiff and uncomfortable against your body. Your attention must not waver, despite the fatigue, despite the monotony. You continue to scan the horizon, searching for movement, for the telltale dust of riders, for any indication that you are not alone in this vast landscape. Bandits are always a possibility, though not a constant certainty. They strike when caravans appear vulnerable, when guards seem inattentive, when the odds favor quick theft over sustained defense. You have been in 2 encounters with bandits during your time as a caravan guard. Neither resulted in prolonged combat. In the first instance, the bandits assessed the caravan's defenses, noted the number and readiness of the guards, and chose to withdraw rather than risk engagement. In the second instance, a brief exchange of arrows convinced the attackers that easier targets existed elsewhere. Both encounters left you shaken, though you showed no outward sign of this. Violence remained a potential rather than an actuality, and for this you are grateful. The caravan continues its patient progress. Miles accumulate behind you, though you do not think in terms of miles. Distance is measured in landmarks. A distinctive rock formation passed, a dry riverbed crossed, a particular bend in the ancient track. These are the increments of progress, the signs that the day's destination grows nearer. You notice everything and nothing. A bird circling in the distance receives a moment's attention. Is it alone? Or might it signal carrion, which might signal danger? The bird is alone, following its own purposes. You return your gaze to the landscape. A change in the sand's color draws your eye. Is it merely a different mineral composition? Or might it indicate water beneath the surface? It is merely sand. Your attention moves on. This is the nature of vigilance over long hours. Most of what you observe proves insignificant, but you cannot know which observation will matter until you make it. So you make them all continuously until observation becomes as automatic as breathing. Late in the afternoon, a caravanserai appears in the distance. It begins as an uncertain shape, a geometric regularity that differs from the organic forms of the landscape. As the caravan draws nearer, the shape resolves into walls, into a gateway, into the unmistakable structure of shelter and security. The pace does not quicken exactly, but there is a subtle change in the caravan's energy. The merchants walk with fractionally lighter steps. The camels, sensing water and rest ahead, maintain their rhythm with perhaps slightly less of the reluctance that had crept into their movement during the hottest hours. Even you, trained to maintain constant awareness, feel a small easing in the tension that has held your shoulders tight throughout the day. The caravanserai is positioned approximately 30 kilometers from the previous night's stop, a standard day's journey for a laden camel caravan. Its walls are thick, built of mud brick and stone, designed to provide defense as well as shelter. The gateway is wide enough to admit camels with their loads, but narrow enough to be defensible if danger threatens. As the caravan approaches, figures appear on the caravanserai's walls, the guards employed by the establishment, assessing the arriving travelers, ensuring this is indeed a merchant caravan and not a threat. Satisfied, they open the gates. The caravan enters the caravanserai's courtyard, a large open space surrounded by walls. Immediately, The systematic process of unloading begins. The merchants direct the placement of their goods, stacking bundles and containers in designated areas. The camels are led to a section of the courtyard where water troughs and feeding areas are maintained. Your duties as a guard shift in focus, but do not end. Inside the caravanserai, the immediate threat of bandits diminishes, but the responsibility for the merchant's goods continues. You help establish a watch rotation for the night, ensuring the stored merchandise remains under guard, even in this relatively secure environment. The evening meal is more substantial than the midday rest. The caravanserai provides food for purchased flatbread baked in a communal oven, a stew of lentils and onions, and occasional small pieces of mutton, tea brewed strong and sweet. You eat slowly, sitting with the other guards in a corner of the courtyard, speaking little but appreciating the simple comfort of warm food after the day's exertion. Water is available here, plentiful enough for actual washing. You fill your water skin to capacity, paying the small fee required. You pour water over your hands, your forearms, your face and neck, feeling the day's accumulation of dust, and salt and sweat gradually dissolve. The water is lukewarm, drawn from a well deep beneath the caravanserai, but it feels like luxury against your skin. The sun sets, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature begins its nightly plunge. You retrieve your blanket from the camel's pack, finding a space along the caravanserai's inner wall where you can sleep with your back protected. The guards maintain their rotation through the night, two always awake and watchful while the others rest. The merchant Hormizd, whom you have been guarding on this particular caravan, represents a type that has become increasingly common along the Silk Road during the 2nd century of the Common Era. He is neither particularly wealthy nor particularly poor, occupying that middle stratum of traders who possess enough capital to finance substantial ventures, but not enough to retire from the uncertainties and hardships of the road. Hormizd was born 43 years ago in the city of Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital situated along the Tigris River. His father was also a merchant, though one who operated primarily within Parthian territories, moving goods between the empire's cities, but rarely venturing into the more distant reaches of the trade networks. From childhood, Hormizd learned the essential skills of his future profession: how to assess the quality of silk by touch, how to detect adulteration in spices, how to negotiate prices in multiple languages, how to maintain the careful accounts that meant the difference between profit and ruin. His education was neither formal nor systematic, but it was thorough in its own way. He learned to read and write in Parthian, and later acquired enough knowledge of Chinese characters to recognize the marks that indicated a silk's origin and quality. He learned the basics of arithmetic necessary for commerce. He learned which officials required bribes and which considered such offers insulting. He learned to read the subtle signs in a merchant's posture and tone that indicated willingness to lower a price or determination to hold firm. At 16, he accompanied his father on his first long-distance journey, traveling eastward through Parthian territories toward the edges of the Kushan Empire. The journey lasted 7 months, including time spent waiting in various cities for favorable conditions, for the assembly of caravans large enough to be safe, for the resolution of political complications that temporarily closed certain routes. That first journey taught him lessons that no amount of instruction could have conveyed. He learned what it meant to walk day after day across landscapes that offered no comfort, no familiarity, no respite from the work of simply continuing. He learned the particular exhaustion that comes from sleeping on hard ground night after night, from eating the same limited foods week after week, from breathing air thick with dust and sand. He learned that the romance of distant places, so vivid in imagination, dissolved into the unglamorous reality of blistered feet and aching muscles and the constant, grinding awareness of danger. When his father died, succumbing to a fever during a journey, buried in a foreign city under a sky he had never seen as a child, Hormizd inherited a modest amount of capital and a network of business relationships. He was 24 years old, considered young for independent merchant ventures, but not impossibly so. The network his father had built proved more valuable than the capital. Trade along the Silk Road functions as much through personal connections and mutual trust as through simple exchange of goods for currency. Hormized's first independent venture was cautious, almost timid. He purchased a small quantity of dates and dried fruits in Ctesiphon, transported them eastward to Merv, and sold them for a modest profit. The entire journey took 3 months. His profit, after accounting for caravan fees, caravanserai charges, customs duties, and the wages of a single servant, amounted to approximately 15% of his initial investment. It was neither impressive nor disappointing, simply the normal return for a low-risk trade in common goods. His second venture was more ambitious. He purchased silk that had arrived in Merv from Kashan territories, silk that had originated much farther east in lands controlled by the Han dynasty. He transported this silk westward, selling it in Ecbatana to merchants who would carry it farther still, toward the Mediterranean and the Roman markets, where silk commanded extraordinary prices. This venture yielded higher profits, nearly 40% return on investment. It also taught him about risk. During the journey, his caravan was attacked by bandits operating in the borderlands between Parthian and Kashan control. The attack was repelled, but 2 guards were injured, one seriously. Hormized paid for their medical treatment, as custom and basic humanity demanded. He also paid bonuses to the guards who had fought most effectively, ensuring their loyalty for future journeys. These unexpected expenses reduced his profit considerably, though not enough to turn the venture into a loss. Over the following years, he established a pattern. 2 or 3 major journeys per year, sometimes traveling east toward Koshan territories, sometimes west toward Mediterranean markets, occasionally south toward Indian ports, where goods from maritime trade routes became available. Between journeys, he spent time in Ctesiphon, managing his household, arranging marriages for his daughters, maintaining the relationships that facilitated his business. The work of a long-distance merchant consists largely of waiting for caravans to assemble, waiting for political situations to stabilize, waiting for seasons to change, since certain routes become impassable during winter or during the intense heat of summer, waiting for goods to arrive from distant sources, waiting for buyers to arrive with sufficient capital to make purchases worthwhile. Hormized spends approximately half his time traveling and half his time waiting in various cities, conducting the negotiations and arrangements that make travel possible. In Merv, he has established relationships with 3 other merchants who regularly participate in caravan ventures. They share information about routes, about political conditions, about prices in various markets. They sometimes pool resources to purchase goods collectively, reducing individual risk. They recommend guards, camel drivers, and servants to one another, creating a network of trusted personnel. In the Kashan city of Bactra, he knows a merchant named Radrasima, who deals primarily in goods arriving from India spices, particularly pepper and cinnamon, as well as cotton textiles and occasional precious stones. Radrasima provides Hormized with access to these goods at prices somewhat better than Hormized could negotiate independently. In exchange for Hormized's assistance in selling Parthian products, wine, dates, metalwork in Kashan territories. The profits from individual ventures vary considerably. A successful journey might yield returns of 50%, sometimes even higher if conditions are particularly favorable. If a glut in one market creates low prices, and a shortage in another market creates high prices, and the merchant is positioned to exploit this differential. But such conditions are rare and unpredictable. More commonly, returns range from 20 to 35%, and from this must be subtracted all the costs of living and maintaining a household during the months between ventures. Failed ventures are also a constant possibility. Goods might be lost to bandits despite the presence of guards. They might be damaged by weather-heavy rains ruining textiles, extreme heat spoiling foodstuffs. They might arrive at a market only to discover that other merchants have flooded that market with similar goods, driving prices below profitable levels. Hormizd has experienced 3 complete losses during his career, ventures where he recovered nothing from his initial investment. Each loss set him back substantially, requiring careful economy for months afterward to rebuild his capital. Hormizd married when he was 26, an arrangement negotiated between his mother and the family of a merchant who operated primarily in Western Parthian territories. The marriage was, like most marriages among the merchant class, a combination of economic calculation and social expectation. His wife, Shaparak, brought a modest dowry. More importantly, she brought connections to her father's business network, expanding Hormizd's access to information and opportunities in regions where he had previously lacked strong relationships. The marriage has been neither particularly happy nor particularly unhappy. Shaparak manages the household during Hormizd's long absences, a role that requires substantial competence and authority. She oversees servants, manages expenses, maintains social relationships with other merchant families, and raises their children. When Hormizd returns from journeys, they interact with polite formality, discussing household matters and making decisions about their children's futures. There is little romance between them, but there is mutual respect and an understanding of shared interests. They have had 5 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. Their eldest son, now 21, has begun accompanying Hormizd on trading ventures, learning the business as Hormizd once learned from his father. Their second son died at age 7 from a fever. Their eldest daughter is married to the son of another merchant, a union that has proven advantageous for establishing trade connections in northern Parthian territories. Their youngest daughter, now 15, is being prepared for marriage to a merchant family in Merv, an arrangement that will further expand Hormizd's network in that crucial trading city. Their third son, the youngest child, is 12 and has shown an inclination towards scholarship rather than commerce, spending his time learning to read and write more extensively than is strictly necessary for business purposes. Hormizd regards his children with a mixture of affection and practicality. He wants them to prosper, to have easier lives than his own, but he understands that security comes only through careful management of resources and relationships. His daughters' marriages have been negotiated with as much attention to commercial advantage as to their personal compatibility with their husbands. His surviving sons are being trained to continue the family business, to maintain and expand the networks that Hormizd has spent decades building. Hormizd follows the Zoroastrian faith, as do most Parthian merchants of his class. His religious practice is neither particularly devout nor particularly lax. He maintains the necessary rituals, the daily prayers, the observance of major festivals, the maintenance of a sacred fire in his household. These practices provide structure and meaning, connecting him to traditions that extend back through generations. But religion along the Silk Road is a complicated matter. Hormizd regularly conducts business with Buddhists, particularly in Kashan territories, where Buddhism has become increasingly prominent. He has learned to recognize the outward signs of Buddhist practice, to show appropriate respect for Buddhist monks and monasteries, to navigate the cultural expectations that differ from his own traditions. He has even made donations to Buddhist monasteries, not out of religious conviction, but out of practical recognition that such donations facilitate business relationships and ensure favorable treatment in Buddhist-dominated regions. In some cities, he encounters merchants who practice other faiths, entirely Greek merchants who worship gods he barely recognizes, Jewish merchants operating along the trade routes, followers of various local deities and traditions. He has learned to interact with all of them without allowing religious differences to interfere with business. Trade requires a certain flexibility, a willingness to set aside differences in pursuit of mutual profit. This particular journey, the one during which you serve as his guard, represents a fairly typical venture for Hormizd at this stage of his career. He is transporting a mixed cargo, several bundles of Chinese silk purchased in Bactra, some Indian cotton textiles acquired through Rudrasimha, a quantity of dried fruits and nuts, and various smaller items that he hopes to sell opportunistically if favorable conditions arise. His destination is a city approximately 2 months' journey distant, where he has arranged to meet with merchants who will purchase the silk and textiles at prices negotiated through correspondence carried by previous caravans. The profit on this venture, if all proceeds as planned, should amount to approximately 30% of his investment. From this he must pay caravan fees, caravanserai charges, guards' wages, customs duties at several points along the route, and various smaller expenses. He is accompanied by his eldest son, who walks alongside the camels and participates in the daily decisions about the caravan's progress. This is the young man's 8th journey, and Hormizd observes with satisfaction that his son is learning to make sound judgments about when to push forward and when to rest, when to pay for better accommodations and when to accept more basic conditions, when to bargain aggressively and when to accept an offered price. Hormizd spends much of each day's walking time in calculation, mentally reviewing the accounts of this venture and planning future ones. He considers which goods are likely to command good prices in coming months, based on information gathered from other merchants about conditions in various markets. He evaluates potential routes, weighing the dangers and difficulties of different paths against the potential profits of reaching particular destinations. He reviews his relationships with other merchants, considering which connections should be strengthened and which have proven disappointing. In his 27 years as an independent merchant, Hormizd has survived numerous threats that might have ended his career or his life. He has been in 4 caravan attacks by bandits, though only the first resulted in significant losses. He has weathered 2 severe sandstorms that scattered his caravans and required days of searching to recover all the animals and goods. He has been detained by officials demanding bribes, forcing him to negotiate payments that reduced his profits without quite eliminating them entirely. He has suffered serious illness twice during journeys, once a fever that left him delirious for several days, tended by servants who had no particular medical knowledge but did their best to keep him alive, and once a severe digestive ailment that left him weak and barely able to walk for more than 2 weeks. Both times he considered the possibility that he might die far from home, buried in foreign soil like his father. Both times he survived through a combination of constitution, care, and simple fortune. He has seen men die along the road, guards killed in skirmishes with bandits, servants succumbing to illness or exposure, other merchants struck down by sudden catastrophes, a fall from a startled camel, a bite from a venomous creature, a heart that simply ceased to beat during the night. Each death has reinforced his awareness of the constant risks, the fragility of life maintained across such hostile landscapes. Yet he continues. Partly from necessity, he has a family to support, a position to maintain, no other source of livelihood available to a man of his background and skills. Partly from habit, this is the life he knows, the work he understands, the identity he has constructed over decades. And partly, though he would not articulate this even to himself, because the work provides a kind of purpose that transcends mere profit. He is a link in the chains that connect distant civilizations. The silk he carries will clothe bodies and lands he will never see. The spices he transports will flavor foods prepared by people who will never know his name. There is a quiet satisfaction in this, a sense of participation in something larger than individual survival. Sometimes, during the night watches at caravanserais, Hormizd lies awake and considers the accumulated weight of his years. He is past the midpoint of life, assuming he achieves an average lifespan. His body has begun to show the wear of the road joints that ache in cold weather, a persistent pain in his lower back, the gradual diminishment of stamina that makes each journey slightly more taxing than the one before. He wonders how many more journeys he can reasonably undertake. 5 years? 10? At some point, he will need to step back to allow his eldest son to take primary responsibility for the family's trading ventures. The thought brings both relief and a curious sense of loss. What will he be when he is no longer a merchant actively traveling the Silk Road? How will he occupy his days? How will he define his purpose? These are not urgent questions, not yet, but they linger in his mind during the quiet hours, mixing with the sounds of the caravanserai, the bells of shifting camels, the low conversations of other merchants, the footsteps of guards making their rounds. As you travel along the Silk Road, walking day after day across landscapes that seem eternal and unchanging, you pass places that hold mysteries even the merchants cannot fully explain. Beneath the sand, beneath the gravel, beneath the thin crust of the present, lie remnants of peoples and settlements whose stories have faded into fragmentary whispers. The Taklamakan Desert, which the caravan skirts along its northern edge, is a vast expanse of shifting dunes and merciless aridity. Its name, in the languages of those who know it best, is sometimes translated as the place of no return, or go in, and you won't come out. Yet even this hostile landscape once supported human life in ways that now seem almost impossible to comprehend. Hormizd has heard stories from other merchants, tales passed along the caravan routes like the goods themselves. Stories of travelers who stumbled upon fragments of buildings emerging from the sand after storms. Wooden beams weathered smooth, but still recognizable as human construction. Pieces of pottery scattered across the desert floor. Scraps of fabric, impossibly old, preserved by the extreme dryness. These are not legends of treasure or glory, but quieter mysteries. Evidence of settlement where no settlement should be possible. Proof that the desert was not always as it is now, that rivers flowed where there is now only sand, that people once lived where now nothing lives. Among the most unsettling discoveries are the bodies. Not skeletal remains, but mummies preserved with such completeness that their hair remains visible, their clothing intact, their faces retaining traces of the individuals they once were. These mummies have been found in the Tarim Basin, in areas where ancient burial grounds have been exposed by the desert's shifting sands. They date to periods extending back nearly 2 millennia before your time as a caravan guard, though some are more recent. They were buried in boat-shaped coffins, laid to rest with goods that suggest both pastoral and agricultural ways of life. What makes these mummies particularly mysterious is their appearance. Many have features that seem unexpected for this region-like colored hair, in shades of brown, red, or even blonde. Facial structures that differ from the populations that now dominate these lands. They were clothed in woolen garments, some woven with intricate patterns, some made of felt, some incorporating furs and leathers. The preservation is extraordinary. The extreme dryness of the desert has maintained these bodies in states that allow even their clothing to remain largely intact. The colors faded, but still distinguishable. They were buried with grain barley, millet, wheat suggesting agricultural practices. Some were interred with what appears to be cheese, preserved for millennia in the arid conditions. Who were these people? What languages did they speak? What beliefs guided their burial practices? These questions persist without complete answers. Recent investigations suggest they may have been a genetically isolated population, descendants of ancient groups that settled in this region and maintained their distinctiveness, even as they adopted agricultural and pastoral practices from neighboring peoples. They represent a culture that thrived in landscapes that subsequently became inhospitable, that maintained traditions and practices now lost to time. Their presence in the archaeological record is like a voice speaking from profound distance, comprehensible only in fragments, raising more questions than it answers. The caravan route you travel follows paths determined by the availability of water. But these paths have not always been where they are now. Rivers in this region are unpredictable, fed by distant snowmelt, subject to changes in climate and geological shifts that redirect their courses. Where rivers once flowed, cities once stood. When rivers change their courses or diminish to nothing, Those cities were gradually abandoned, their populations dispersing to more favorable locations, their buildings left to the desert's patient reclamation. The city of Nia is one such place, though it will not be discovered and excavated for many centuries beyond your time. It lies somewhere in the desert to the south of the routes you travel, positioned where a river once provided water to sustain agriculture and settlement. At its height, the kingdom of which Nia was a part controlled important sections of the southern Silk Road routes. But rivers are not permanent in these landscapes. The Nia River, like others in the region, eventually ceased to flow with sufficient water to support the settlement. The city was gradually abandoned, its inhabitants moving elsewhere, its buildings left standing empty until the sand began to accumulate around them, covering walls and filling rooms, burying evidence of the lives once lived there. Other cities suffered similar fates. Dandin Ulik, Ender, Lulan. Each represents a point along ancient trade routes, a place where merchants once stopped, where goods were bought and sold, where guards like yourself once stood watch. Each eventually succumbed to the shifting environmental conditions that make permanent settlements so precarious in these borderlands between habitability and barrenness. The merchants sometimes speak of these lost places with a superstitious wariness. They are reminders of impermanence, evidence that even established settlements, places that seem secure and prosperous, can be rendered uninhabitable by forces beyond human control. The Silk Road is not a stable network of fixed points, but a shifting arrangement that adapts to changing conditions, routes adjusting as some cities fade and others emerge. In the caravanserai at night, you sometimes observe merchants reviewing documents, contracts, letters of credit, inventories of goods. These documents are written in various scripts, depending on the merchant's origin and the intended recipient. Parthian script, Chinese characters, Greek letters. Each represents a different tradition of recording and preserving information. But there are other scripts, older or more obscure, that fewer people can read. In the city-states of the Tarim Basin, some documents are written in a script called Kharosti, derived from writing systems used far to the west, but adapted for languages spoken in these Central Asian regions. These documents record contracts, legal proceedings, letters between officials, the routine administrative work of settled communities. The language in these documents is related to tongues spoken in distant Gandhara, in the northwestern regions of the Indian subcontinent. Yet it is used here, far to the northeast, adapted to local needs and circumstances. This represents the remarkable fluidity of the Silk Road world, where languages and writing systems travel along with goods, where administrative practices from one region are adopted and modified in another. Future generations will find these documents puzzling, requiring careful scholarly work to decipher and translate. They will provide windows into the daily concerns of people living in these Silk Road settlements, disputes over property, arrangements for marriages, appointments of officials, complaints about unfair treatment. Not the grand narratives of empires and conquests, but the small, persistent concerns that occupy most human lives, regardless of era or location. The religious landscape of the Silk Road is as complex as its commercial networks. You encounter this complexity daily as the caravan moves through different regions, each with its own dominant traditions and practices. Buddhism has been spreading eastward along these routes for generations. Monks and merchants carry texts, translate teachings, establish monasteries in cities and towns along the way. The religion adapts as it travels, incorporating elements from the cultures it encounters, taking on different forms in different regions. In Kashan territories, Buddhism flourishes with royal patronage. Monasteries receive donations from wealthy merchants seeking spiritual merit. Artistic traditions blend influences from Greek sculptural styles, Persian decorative motifs, and Indian iconographic conventions, creating forms of Buddhist art that would appear foreign in the lands where Buddhism originated. Zoroastrianism, Harmized's faith, also travels these routes, though perhaps with less missionary fervor than Buddhism. Zoroastrian merchants maintain their practices wherever they settle, establishing fire temples and trading cities, maintaining the rituals that connect them to tradition and community. Their religion provides frameworks for understanding commerce itself, the cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, order and chaos, reflected in the ethical demands placed upon honest trading practices. Other beliefs circulate as well, less prominent but nonetheless present. Followers of various local deities and spirits, practitioners of shamanic traditions, people whose religious lives consist of layered combinations, honoring Buddhist teachings while also propitiating local spirits, maintaining Zoroastrian fire rituals while also respecting Buddhist holy sites. This religious diversity is not generally a source of conflict along the Silk Road, at least not during this period. Merchants and travelers develop a pragmatic tolerance, recognizing that trade depends on cooperation across difference. The monasteries and temples of various faiths coexist in the same cities, sometimes even collaborating in charitable works or educational endeavors. You witness this yourself in the caravanserais, Buddhist monks traveling to study at distant monasteries, Zoroastrian merchants performing their prayer rituals, individuals whose beliefs you cannot quite identify, whose practices seem to combine elements from multiple traditions. All coexist in the temporary communities formed by caravans, bound together by the shared experience of travel and the common interest in reaching destinations safely. The graves you occasionally pass along the route reveal something of how different peoples conceive of death and what follows it. Some burials are marked by simple cairns, piles of stones assembled to indicate a place of rest. Others are more elaborate, with structures built to honor the deceased. The Saka peoples, nomadic groups who control some territories through which the Silk Road passes, bury their elites in great mounds called kurgans. These burial mounds contain not only bodies, but also grave goods weapons, jewelry, decorative objects, sometimes even horses, sacrificed to accompany the deceased in whatever realm awaits. The goods indicate status, wealth, and beliefs about what the dead might need in their continued existence. Some graves contain evidence of trade connections extending over vast distances. Chinese silk found in burial mounds far to the west. Gold work showing artistic influences from multiple traditions. Silver vessels decorated with images of Greek gods, found in tombs in regions where Greek culture was never politically dominant. These objects traveled the trade routes in life and accompanied their owners in death, becoming part of the archaeological record that future generations will excavate and study. The variety of burial practices reflects the diversity of beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the relationship between the living and the dead. Some peoples bury their dead in a fetal position, suggesting beliefs about death as a return to the womb, a rebirth into another existence. Others extend bodies fully, facing particular directions, oriented towards sacred landmarks or celestial phenomena. Some include food and drink in graves, provisions for a journey. Others include tools and weapons, suggesting continuity of identity and occupation beyond death. You do not dwell extensively on these matters as you walk beside the caravan. Death is a constant possibility in your profession, but this does not mean you spend your days in morbid contemplation. Rather, the graves you pass are simply part of the landscape, markers of human presence in regions that seem to resist human habitation, evidence that others have traveled these routes before you and that others will travel them after you are gone. The Silk Road is not merely a route for transporting goods from one market to another. It is a mechanism for cultural transformation, a process through which ideas, techniques, artistic styles, and beliefs circulate and combine in unexpected ways. Musical instruments travel eastward the lute, originating in Western regions, appearing in new forms in Central Asian and Chinese contexts. Artistic motifs move in both directions. Chinese dragon imagery appearing in Central Asian decorative arts, Persian floral patterns incorporated into Chinese textile designs. Culinary practices spread along the routes as well. Grapes and wine, originating in Western regions, become cultivated in oasis cities along the Silk Road. Spices from India pepper, cinnamon, cardamom transform cuisines in regions far from their origins. Tea, which will become one of the most important traded commodities in later centuries, is beginning to circulate beyond Chinese territories. Technologies transfer through these networks. Metallurgical techniques, irrigation methods suited to arid environments, weaving technologies that produce particular types of fabric. The knowledge travels with the people who possess it, craftsmen relocating to take advantage of opportunities in distant cities, merchants observing techniques, and bringing descriptions back to their home regions. Enslaved people carrying expertise to new locations against their will. This cultural exchange is not a neutral process of mutual enrichment. It involves power differentials, cultural dominance, the gradual erosion of some traditions as they are overwhelmed by more politically or economically powerful alternatives. Languages fade as others become more useful for commerce. Local religious practices are absorbed into more organized, text-based traditions. Artistic styles that once expressed distinct cultural identities become homogenized through contact and combination. Yet diversity persists. The Silk Road during the 2nd century CE remains a patchwork of cultures, languages, beliefs, and practices. Empires Han, Kashan, Parthian controlled broad territories, but within those territories, tremendous variation continues. The road connects these variations without entirely eliminating them, creates channels for influence without erasing the distinctiveness that makes exchange meaningful. Late one afternoon, the caravan passes unusually close to a site that appears to have once been a settlement. Mounds in the sand suggest walls buried beneath the surface. Fragments of pottery lie scattered, their edges worn smooth by wind-blown sand. Pieces of wood protrude from dunes' roof beams, perhaps or parts of door frames, impossible to determine with certainty. No one lives here now. No one has lived here for longer than anyone in the caravan can remember. The site is not even named, at least not with a name anyone currently knows. It exists as evidence of habitation without a story, occupation without identity. The caravan does not stop. There is nothing to be gained from investigating these ruins. No water to be drawn, no shelter to be claimed. The camels continue their patient walking. The bells continue their gentle chiming. The guards maintain their observation of the surrounding landscape, seeking living threats, not archaeological puzzles. But the site remains in your mind as the afternoon progresses toward evening. Somewhere beneath that sand are the remnants of lives, the floors people walked upon, the vessels they used for eating and drinking, perhaps even the bodies of those who once inhabited this place. Their stories are lost, not through dramatic catastrophe, but through the quiet process of abandonment and forgetting. This is the fate that awaits all settlements in these marginal lands, you reflect. The cities where caravans currently stop, where merchants conduct business and guards find employment. These, too, will eventually face changes in water availability, shifts in political control, the gradual migration of trade routes to more favorable corridors. What now seems permanent will prove temporary. What now has names and stories will eventually be reduced to anonymous mounds in the desert, puzzles for future travelers who will wonder what these places once were. The thought is neither frightening nor depressing. Exactly. It is simply a fact of existence in these landscapes, a recognition of impermanence that you have learned to accept with the same patient equanimity you bring to all aspects of this profession. You walk, the miles accumulate, the sun sets. The caravan reaches another caravanserai, another temporary refuge. Tomorrow you will walk again, and eventually you too will be gone, your individual life absorbed into the vast anonymity of time, leaving perhaps some small trace, a weapon, a piece of clothing, a fragment of bone for future peoples to puzzle over, if they puzzle over such things at all. The desert preserves and the desert erases, according to processes beyond human control or understanding. In the darkness of the caravanserai, lying wrapped in your blanket beneath the immense scatter of stars, you close your eyes and drift toward sleep, your mind empty of questions, accepting of mysteries that have no solutions. The Silk Road, for all its appearance of egalitarian commerce, exists within rigidly hierarchical societies. The caravan you guard contains multiple social levels compressed into a temporary community, and beyond the caravan lie the permanent structures of power and privilege that define the empires through which you travel. You, as a caravan guard, occupy a position that is neither elevated nor particularly degraded. You possess skills that command payment. You are free to negotiate your terms of employment, to accept or refuse particular ventures based on your assessment of risk and reward. But you are also fundamentally dependent on others for your livelihood, selling your labor and accepting the dangers that come with it. Above you in the social order are the merchants, though even among them there are vast differences. Hormizd, with his modest capital and his carefully calculated ventures, exists in the middle ranges of commercial life. Above him are merchants whose wealth allows them to finance multiple caravans simultaneously, who never personally walk the routes, but employ agents to conduct their business, who live in substantial houses in major cities, and participate in the governance of those cities through wealth and influence. And above even the wealthiest merchants are the aristocrats, the hereditary nobility whose power derives not primarily from commerce, but from land, military service, and proximity to royal authority. In the Parthian Empire, through whose territories this caravan travels, society is formally divided into distinct classes. At the apex stand the king and his immediate family, wielding authority that is theoretically absolute, but practically constrained by the power of the nobility. Below the royal family are the great aristocratic houses, families whose lineages extend back generations, who control vast estates and maintain their own armed retinues. These aristocrats, the Azadin, the free and noble, live lives utterly different from yours. They reside in fortified estates or in palaces within major cities. They own land measured in units you can barely comprehend, estates that encompass entire villages, worked by farmers who are bound to the land and to their aristocratic masters through relationships that are neither quite slavery nor quite freedom. The clothing that distinguishes aristocrats is made from the finest materials, silk from China, wool of exceptional quality, garments dyed in colors that require expensive materials and skilled labor. Their horses are bred for quality, tall and strong, adorned with decorated harnesses and saddles, worked with precious metals. They eat foods prepared by skilled cooks, meals that include meats and fruits and delicacies that common people taste only on rare festival occasions. Their military obligations differ from those of hired guards like yourself. Aristocrats serve as heavy cavalry, armored warriors mounted on armored horses, wielding lances and bows from positions of intimidating elevation. This form of warfare requires wealth the cost of armor for both rider and mount, the expense of maintaining horses that must be fed even when not actively campaigning, the years of training necessary to fight effectively in this manner. When aristocrats travel, they do so with entourages. Servants attend to their needs. Guards provide protection, but these guards serve particular masters with expectations of loyalty beyond the merely contractual relationship you have with merchants. The aristocrat does not walk beside a camel caravan, measuring progress in painful increments of miles. He rides, and when he stops for the night, accommodations are prepared by servants who have traveled ahead to ensure appropriate conditions. Between the aristocrats and people of your station exist multiple intermediate positions. In the Kashan Empire, to the east, the administrative structure creates roles for those who serve the state governors of provinces, titled Mahakshatrapa, who rule territories in the emperor's name. Below them are lesser officials, collectors of customs duties, overseers of public works, administrators of justice. These officials are not aristocrats by birth, though some may rise to positions that allow them to acquire land and establish their own minor noble status. They receive salaries, perquisites, and opportunities for enrichment through the exercise of their authority. They occupy the middle ranks of society, comfortable but not wealthy, secure but not powerful. In cities along the route, a merchant class has established itself with varying degrees of success. Some merchants, through decades of profitable ventures, or through fortunate single transactions that yielded extraordinary returns, have accumulated sufficient wealth to purchase land, to build substantial houses, to marry their children into minor aristocratic families. These successful merchants begin to resemble aristocrats in their manner of living, though they never quite achieve the hereditary status and formal recognition that true nobility possesses. Other merchants, like Hormizd, maintain respectable but modest positions. They own their goods and their working capital, but they do not own land beyond perhaps a house in a city. They employ servants, but only one or two, not the households of dozens that characterize aristocratic establishments. Their children will likely be merchants as well, continuing the family trade, marrying other merchants' children in unions that consolidate commercial networks rather than ascend social hierarchies. Below the merchants, below the minor officials, below all those who possess some measure of autonomy and security, exist those whose labor sustains the entire structure. Farmers who work land they do not own, paying rent in kind to aristocratic landlords, living in small villages where poverty is simply the normal condition of existence. Artisans whose skills provide livelihood but rarely prosperity, weavers and potters and metalworkers who produce goods for markets but who themselves live simply. And below, even these free poor are the enslaved. Slavery exists throughout the regions connected by the Silk Road, though its forms and prevalence vary. Some slaves are prisoners of war, captured in the constant conflicts between empires and kingdoms, their freedom forfeit as consequence of military defeat. Others are born into slavery, the children of enslaved parents, inheriting their parents' status. Some are enslaved through debt, selling themselves or being sold by family members when economic catastrophe makes slavery preferable to starvation. The distinction between freedom and slavery can be thin in certain circumstances. A free person who falls into debt may become bound to creditors in ways that practically eliminate freedom of movement or choice, creating conditions barely distinguishable from outright slavery. Slaves perform various forms of labor depending on their circumstances. Domestic slaves serve in aristocratic and wealthy merchant households, cooking, cleaning, maintaining gardens, attending to the personal needs of their owners. Agricultural slaves work on large estates, their labor producing the wealth that sustains aristocratic lifestyles. Some slaves possess skills that make them valuable literate slaves who can maintain accounts. Slaves trained in particular crafts, slaves who speak multiple languages and can serve as translators. The treatment of slaves varies with the temperament of owners and the economic calculations that govern their use. Some owners recognize that well-treated slaves work more effectively and are less likely to attempt escape or rebellion. Others view slaves as fundamentally expendable, working them harshly and replacing them when they break down or die. Legal protections for slaves are minimal or non-existent, their welfare dependent entirely on the inclinations of those who own them. You have known a few individuals who were once enslaved but gained freedom through various means. A man who saved enough money, working for years in whatever capacity allowed him to accumulate small sums, to eventually purchase his freedom. A woman who was freed by an owner's will upon that owner's death. A young man who escaped slavery and managed to reach a region where his former master's authority did not extend, establishing a new identity as a free person. These freed individuals occupy an uncertain social position, legally free, but bearing the stigma of former slavery. They find work where they can, often in occupations that free-born people consider beneath their dignity. Some manage to achieve a kind of respectability over time, their past gradually fading as they establish themselves in new communities. Others remain marginal, never quite accepted, always vulnerable to suspicion and discrimination. Even within the temporary community of a caravanserai, social hierarchies assert themselves. The better accommodations rooms, with solid walls, rather than simply floor space in the common courtyard, are reserved for those who can pay premium fees. Wealthy merchants secure these private spaces, conduct their business in relative comfort, sleep on carpets and cushions brought by their servants. Merchants of middling means, like Hormizd, pay for basic shelter, but not luxury. They sleep in the courtyard alongside their goods, wrapped in their own blankets, accepting the hard ground and the limited privacy. You and the other guards occupy the least desirable positions, often sleeping near the gates where you can monitor who enters and exits, where you are most exposed to weather and least protected from disturbance. The food available at caravanserais similarly reflects and reinforces social distinctions. The basic meal provided flatbread, lentil stew, tea is available to all who pay the standard fee. But wealthier travelers can purchase additional items, better cuts of meat, fresh fruits when available, wines, and other luxuries. These enhanced meals are consumed in the private rooms, not in the common areas where others might observe and envy the disparity. Servants move between these levels, serving their employers, but themselves occupying positions only marginally above the enslaved. Some are free, working for wages that allow them to support families in distant cities. Others are bound servants, obligated to work for particular masters through debt or other compulsory arrangements. They eat what their masters provide, sleep where space permits, own nothing beyond a few personal items they carry with them. Sometimes you observe aristocrats or very wealthy merchants traveling in the opposite direction, their caravans passing yours at points where the route widens enough to permit passage. These encounters make visible the immense gulf between your existence and theirs. The aristocrat rides a fine horse, his posture relaxed, his clothing unstained by the dust that coats your garments. Servants walk alongside, ready to attend to any need. Guards better equipped than you, wearing finer armor, carrying weapons of superior quality maintain positions around their master with the discipline, bearing of men who serve a single lord rather than accepting temporary employment from various merchants. When such a caravan stops, tents are erected, creating temporary but comfortable living spaces. Carpets are laid on the ground. Cushions are arranged. Food is prepared that bears little resemblance to the dry bread and simple stews that constitute your diet. The aristocrat rests in shade while his servants manage all practical matters. He drinks wine cooled with snow brought down from mountain peaks by runners employed specifically for this purpose. He receives reports from messengers who travel ahead and behind, keeping him informed of conditions along the route. You do not resent this. Exactly. Resentment requires a belief that alternative arrangements are possible, and you have been formed by a world that presents social hierarchy as natural and inevitable. The aristocrat occupies his position by birth, by the favor of ancestors, by divine arrangement, depending on which explanation prevails in a given cultural context. You occupy yours by similar forces, your birth into a particular family determining the range of possibilities available to you. But you are aware of the difference. You feel it in the ache of your feet after a day's walking, while the aristocrat's feet touch only stirrups and carpets. You taste it in the simple food you eat, while aromas of roasted meats drift from aristocratic encampments. You experience it in the hardness of the ground, where you sleep while others rest on cushions in enclosed tents. Hormizd and other merchants like him occupy an interesting intermediate position. They are not aristocrats. They possess no hereditary titles, no formal nobility, no automatic claims to deference and authority. But neither are they poor or powerless. They control capital, command the labor of others, make decisions that affect multiple lives. In some contexts, particularly in cities where commerce dominates, wealthy merchants wield substantial influence. They may serve in advisory capacities to local governors. They may fund public works, the construction or maintenance of caravanserais, the digging of wells, the provision of charitable food distribution during times of scarcity. Through these contributions, they purchase respect and a measure of social standing that transcends pure commercial success. Yet they remain vulnerable in ways aristocrats are not. A series of failed ventures can reduce a merchant to poverty with remarkable speed. Hormizd knows merchants who were once wealthy, who lived in fine houses and enjoyed luxuries, who lost everything through bad fortune or poor judgment, and now struggle to survive. Aristocrats may experience political setbacks, may lose favor with kings, or be defeated in factional struggles. But their land remains, their family status persists, their fundamental position in the social order endures. Merchants cannot bequeath their occupation in the way aristocrats bequeath titles and land. Each merchant's children must prove themselves capable of continuing the family business. The wealth is not automatic, not guaranteed by birth. It must be earned again each generation through competence and fortune. This creates a kind of anxiety that aristocrats do not experience, a persistent awareness of precariousness underlying even successful commercial careers. For those at the bottom of the social order, life is a constant struggle against scarcity. The farmers in villages you pass survive on the edge of subsistence, their harvests barely sufficient to feed their families after paying rent to landlords and taxes to authorities. A bad harvest means hunger, perhaps starvation. 2 consecutive bad harvests mean catastrophe, the sale of children, flight to cities, enslavement through debt. Urban poor crowd the streets of cities, performing casual labor when available, begging when necessary. They sleep in whatever shelter they can find: doorways, alleys, spaces beneath bridges. They eat what they can scavenge or what charitable institutions provide. Disease spreads easily in the crowded, unsanitary conditions where they live. Children die with tragic regularity. Adults age rapidly, their bodies worn out by malnutrition and constant physical strain. The enslaved, at least those owned by wealthy households, sometimes live in conditions marginally more secure than the free poor. They are fed, however poorly, because starving slaves are less useful. They have shelter, however basic, because investment in slave purchase justifies minimal maintenance. This is not to suggest slavery is preferable to freedom, the loss of autonomy, the vulnerability to arbitrary punishment, the impossibility of building any kind of independent life, all make slavery a terrible condition. But the comparison illustrates how desperate poverty can be, how close to slavery free people might live when they possess nothing and control nothing. Rarely, individuals manage to cross between social levels, though such movement is more often downward than upward. An aristocrat who makes catastrophic political mistakes, who sides with a losing faction in a succession dispute, might be stripped of titles and lands, reduced to something approaching common status. A merchant who achieves extraordinary success might purchase enough land to begin establishing a family as minor nobility, though full acceptance into aristocratic society may require generations. More commonly, people fall. Free families become enslaved through debt. Merchants are ruined by losses. Minor officials lose positions through political changes and find themselves reduced to poverty, their administrative skills worthless without institutional positions to exercise them. You have maintained your position as a caravan guard for years, neither rising nor falling. This stability is itself an achievement. You have avoided the catastrophes, the serious injury that would end your ability to perform this work, the entanglement in debt that would strip away your freedom, the sequence of bad decisions or bad luck that would leave you destitute. You have earned enough to survive, to maintain your equipment, to present yourself as competent and employable for the next journey and the journey after that. It is not an ambitious life. You will never be wealthy. You will never own land or command the labor of others. You will walk until your body gives out, and then you will find some other way to survive, probably in diminished circumstances, possibly depending on the charity of relatives or the minimal support of whatever institutions provide for the elderly and incapacitated. But it is a life. You are free. You make choices, however constrained. You experience the satisfaction of competent work performed reliably. And sometimes, in the evening at a caravanserai, watching the sun set over landscapes that care nothing for human hierarchies, you find a kind of peace in simply being alive, in having survived another day, in knowing that tomorrow will bring the same patient rhythm of walking and watching that has defined your existence for so long. In the darkness, when the caravanserai settles into sleep, some of the distinctions blur. The wealthy merchant in his private room and the guard sleeping by the gate both lie horizontal. Both breathe the same air. Both eventually drift into unconsciousness that erases awareness of status and position. Dreams come to aristocrats and slaves alike, following logics that ignore social hierarchy. The stars visible above the courtyard shine equally on all. The cold that descends with night affects everyone, though some have better protection against it than others. The sounds, the bells of shifting camels, the quiet conversations of those still awake, the footsteps of guards making rounds, these create a shared soundscape that everyone experiences. This equality is temporary and largely illusory. Morning will restore all distinctions. The hierarchies will reassert themselves as surely as the sun will rise. But for these hours of darkness and rest, there is a kind of reprieve, a pause in the relentless differentiation that structures waking life. You pull your blanket closer against the night's chill. Your body aches in familiar ways. Tomorrow will bring another day of walking, of vigilance, of occupying your position in the great hierarchy that extends from kings to slaves, from those who command empires to those who are bought and sold like goods. But for now, you simply rest, letting the day's exhaustion draw you down into sleep, accepting the life you have because it is the only life available to you, finding in acceptance something that might almost be called contentment. The desert wind moves softly through the caravanserai. The bells chime their gentle rhythms. And gradually, one by one, the travelers of all ranks surrender to sleep, to the democracy of rest, to the common human need for darkness and restoration. Dawn breaks over the caravanserai as it has broken over countless such places in countless previous mornings, as it will continue to break long after this particular morning has faded into the accumulation of forgotten days. The stars retreat. The sky lightens through shades of deep blue to pale azure. The air, cold through the night, begins its gradual warming as the sun climbs above the eastern horizon. You rise because rising is what the morning demands. Your blanket is folded and secured. Your equipment is checked with the same deliberate attention you have given it every morning for years. The bow, the arrows, the sword, the water skin refilled from the caravanserai's well. Everything in its place, everything ready for another day's labor. Around you, the caravan stirs into life through a series of small, practiced actions. Merchants emerge from private rooms or rise from sleeping places in the courtyard. Servants begin the work of preparing for departure. Camel drivers move among their animals, checking harnesses and loads, making the minor adjustments that prevent larger problems later in the day. The camels are loaded once again. The same process as yesterday, as the day before, as uncounted days stretching backward through time. Heavy bundles lifted and secured, ropes tested and tightened. The animals arranged into their traveling lines, bells attached to ensure the continuity of sound that confirms all remains in order. The caravan departs the caravanserai and returns to the road. Your position today is at the front, scouting ahead, your eyes scanning the landscape for anything unusual, anything that might indicate danger or difficulty. Behind you, the long line of camels extends, their padding feet creating the familiar soft percussion, their bells chiming in overlapping rhythms that seem both random and somehow ordered. The merchant Hormizd walks beside his goods, his mind occupied with calculations and plans. His eldest son walks nearby, learning the patience this profession requires, the ability to endure discomfort and tedium without complaint. The other guards maintain their positions, each performing the role assigned for this day's travel. The landscape passes slowly. Rock formations that seem distant in the morning gradually draw nearer, are reached, are passed, fall behind. The sun climbs toward its zenith. The temperature rises. The rhythm of walking continues, unbroken, patient, consuming the miles through simple persistence. This is not the climax of any narrative. There is no dramatic encounter, no revelation, no transformation. This is simply another day, indistinguishable from the day before and the day that will follow. The work of a caravan guard consists precisely of this, the repetition of necessary actions, the maintenance of vigilance across hours and miles, the patient continuation of movement toward distant destinations. You are one guard on one caravan at one moment in the long history of the Silk Road. Thousands of other guards walk other caravans on other sections of these routes during this same season. Behind you, in the years already past, countless predecessors performed these same duties, protected similar merchants, walked through these same landscapes when they were younger, less worn, but fundamentally unchanged. Ahead of you, in years you will not live to see, other guards will walk these routes, or routes that have shifted slightly as conditions change, as rivers alter their courses, as political boundaries are redrawn, as some cities fade and others rise. The Silk Road is not a fixed thing, but a constantly adjusting network, responding to conditions, finding paths through obstacles, continuing because the demand for goods and the possibility of profit ensure continuation. The silk you guard on this journey originated in workshops far to the east, created by hands you will never see, worn by people you will never meet in lands you will never visit. The spices came from even more distant sources, transported across oceans, carried over land, exchanged in multiple markets before reaching Hormized's caravan. The goods flow from east to west, from west to east, from north to south, creating webs of connection that link distant civilizations. Ideas travel these routes as well. Religious teachings carried by monks and merchants. Artistic techniques transferred through observation and imitation. Technologies spreading from their points of origin to distant applications. Languages borrowing words from each other, creating hybrid forms that reflect the mixing of peoples. The road carries more than mere goods. It carries the elements of culture itself, distributing them across vast distances, facilitating exchanges that gradually transform the civilizations they connect. You are a small part of this process, a single thread in a vast tapestry. Your individual contribution is modest, one caravan protected, one journey completed, one small increment of successful trade facilitated. But the pattern is built from such small contributions, from thousands of individuals performing similar work, creating through their collective efforts the networks that shape history. The day's walking continues. The sun passes its highest point and begins its descent toward the western horizon. The shadows that were short at midday gradually lengthen. The intense heat of afternoon slowly moderates. Another caravanserai appears in the distance, growing from uncertain shape to recognizable structure as the caravan approaches. Tonight you will sleep in another courtyard, beneath another sky. Tomorrow you will rise and repeat this pattern once more, day after day, until this particular journey reaches its destination. And then there will be a period of rest, and then another journey will begin, and the cycle will continue until your body gives out or circumstances end your career in this profession. The seasons turn through their own cycles. Winter makes some routes impassable, closing them until spring. Summer brings heat that forces caravans to travel during cooler hours, resting during the worst of the day's intensity. Spring and autumn offer the most favorable conditions, and these are when the routes see the heaviest traffic. The caravans flow and ebb with the seasons, adapting to conditions, maintaining the patient rhythm of trade across all variations of weather and temperature. Empires rise and fall around these trade routes. The Parthian Empire, through whose territories you currently travel, will eventually weaken and be replaced by other powers. The Qishan Empire will experience its own transformations. The Han Dynasty far to the east will face its own periods of strength and decline. But through all these political changes, the trade routes persist. The demand for silk, for spices, for all the goods that justify the hardship of transport across such distances. This demand continues regardless of which authority claims control over particular territories. You do not think of yourself as part of history. You are simply a man performing work that provides livelihood. The grand patterns, the cultural exchanges, the flow of technologies and ideas, the connections between civilizations, these are not your concern. You focus on the immediate, the landscape ahead, the security of the goods you protect, the steady progress toward the next caravanserai. Yet your life has been shaped by forces larger than yourself. You were born at a time when these trade routes existed and required guards. You learned skills that this particular economic and political moment values. You walk paths that were established by processes extending back long before your birth. And you contribute, however modestly, to the continuation of those processes, ensuring that this caravan reaches its destination, that the merchant can complete his transaction, that the network continues to function. In the end, your life will amount to the miles walked, the caravans protected, the simple satisfaction of competent work performed reliably. There will be no monuments, no records that preserve your name, no stories told about your particular journey through this world. You will be absorbed into the vast anonymity of the past, one more life among countless lives, distinguishable from others only in the small details that fade quickly and are forgotten. This does not trouble you. Fame and remembrance are for aristocrats and kings, for those whose positions elevate them above the ordinary. You are ordinary, and there is a kind of peace in accepting this, in knowing that you need not aspire to greatness, that simple continuation is sufficient, that walking the road day after day is itself an adequate purpose. The world you inhabit is harsh in ways that are difficult to fully convey. The landscape offers little comfort. The work is physically demanding and never truly ends. Danger is a constant possibility, if not a constant presence. Disease, injury, violence, any of these might end your life at any moment. The social structures that surround you are rigid and unforgiving. The poverty that awaits if you fail to maintain your position is crushing and inescapable. But you do not know any different world. This is simply how life is, how it has always been, how you assume it will always be. The possibility of warmth without fire, light without flame, travel without walking, these would seem like magic to you, like the fantasies told in stories, not like real possibilities. From a great distance in time, your world appears remote, almost dreamlike in its difference from the present. The Silk Road exists now only as archaeological sites, historical records, and the gradual reconstruction of scholars piecing together evidence of how people once lived and traveled. The caravanserais are ruins, if they exist at all. The routes are marked on maps, their positions determined by the locations of ancient cities and the logic of geography. But the sound of camel bells no longer echoes across these landscapes. And you, the guard, are gone entirely, absorbed into the vast silence of the past. No trace remains of your individual existence. The bow you carried has long since rotted. The blanket you wrapped around yourself each night has disintegrated into nothingness. Even your bones, if they rested in any grave, have turned to dust. But in this moment, in the eternal present that you inhabit as you walk beside the caravan, you are alive. You feel the ground beneath your feet. You taste the dust in the air. You hear the bells and the soft padding of camel feet and the occasional low conversation of the merchants. You exist fully and completely in a world that is real to you, even as it recedes into impossibility for those who come after. The evening arrives. The caravan reaches the caravanserai. The camels are unloaded. The goods are secured. You take your position for the night's watch rotation. knowing that eventually your turn will come to lie down and rest. And when you do rest, when you wrap yourself in your blanket and settle against the hard ground of the courtyard, you find the same sleep that has claimed you every night of this journey. It comes neither quickly nor slowly, but inevitably pulling you down into darkness, into the temporary cessation of consciousness that is the only true respite from the demands of existence. You are not aware of comfort in any modern sense, but you know the relief of lying down after walking all day. You know the pleasure of warmth when cold threatens. You know the satisfaction of having survived another day, of being alive in a world where so many forces conspire toward death. And perhaps, in some way that you could not articulate, you know something like contentment, not happiness, but an acceptance of your place in the world, a recognition that you have done the work required of you and earned the right to this rest. The stars emerge overhead, the same stars that have guided countless travelers along these routes, that will continue to shine long after all current travelers are gone. The desert wind moves softly through the caravanserai, carrying the sense of distant places, of sand and stone, and the faint traces of human occupation in the midst of vastness. And gradually, in the darkness and the quiet punctuated only by the gentle sounds of the night, you drift into sleep. Tomorrow will bring another day of walking. But tomorrow is not yet here. For now, there is only this moment of rest, this temporary peace, this small space of calm in a difficult world. From your own time, from your own comfort lying warm beneath blankets of softness, the caravan guard could never imagine. In shelter more secure than any caravanserai, with all the dangers and hardships of the ancient Silk Road reduced to quiet words and gentle images, you can observe this distant life with detachment and perhaps a measure of gratitude. You need not walk tomorrow. You need not scan landscapes for threats. You need not measure your water, or ration your food, or sleep on hard ground beneath indifferent stars. The caravan guard's world is gone, replaced by a present that he could not have conceived, that would seem miraculous beyond belief if he could somehow witness it. His struggles are over, not through achievement or triumph, but simply through the passage of time that eventually ends all struggles. The road he walked is silent now. The bells have ceased their chiming. The camels are long gone. The merchants have completed their final transactions. Everything that seemed urgent and necessary has faded into the gentle obscurity of the distant past. And you, resting in your own time, can let this story dissolve like morning mist, can allow the caravan guard to return to the silence from which he briefly emerged, can settle more deeply into your own rest, grateful for the comfort that surrounds you, accepting the sleep that waits patiently to receive you. The Silk Road continues in memory and scholarship, but its physical reality of hardship and patient endurance belongs to a world that no longer exists. Let it rest there. Let the guard find his sleep in that distant caravanserai. Let the bells fade into silence. And let yourself drift now, as you have been drifting throughout this long journey, down into the darkness that restores, into the peace that heals, into the deep and dreamless sleep that awaits at the end of every story, at the close of every day, at the quiet terminus of all journeys. Rest now. The road is long behind you. The night is peaceful. And sleep, when it comes, comes gently, softly, like sand settling in the desert wind, covering everything in blessed stillness. Rest, rest.